Here is the first part of the promised series of videos discussing the Game of Thrones successor shows. This part is going to be focused entirely on the shows we think that could be made out of the stories in the World of Ice and Fire, or references in the Song of Ice and Fire, to things outside of Westeros. Because George R. R. Martin, in his post about these successors, has twice, I think, noted that there was interest in shows beyond, in the lands beyond the Seven Kingdoms. So we're looking at Essos, Ephorios, Ulfos, any of those areas where we think that there might be stories. And there's a lot of potential stories, but we're going to kind of narrow it down to 5 or 6 that we think are reasonable to discuss.
So Ephorios and Ulfos might not be the most likely, because yes, somebody could decide that they wanted something way out there, but they'd have nothing to go on, basically.
Yeah, there's very little. I mean, some people, one of the things that kept being pointed out to us was the Valyrian explorer who flew across Ephorios, and my issue with that, and some of the other ideas that we get to, is like, you're gonna start, like, these are adventure shows, and HBO isn't known for adventure shows. You need something that has more of a serial and a longer format, I think. So that's why we're
more of a connection to what the Game of Thrones brand has been about, I think.
I think you're going to need some of the politics and some of that. I don't think there's going to be any suggestion of a show that doesn't have some political aspects. So we'll start off... I'm not sure which one we'll start off with. We'll discuss that.
The first idea that takes place primarily outside of Westeros would be the story of Nymeria and the 10,000 ships. Now, the backdrop for this would be the fact that in the conflict between the Valyrians and the Rhoynar, Prince Garin the Great, raised a huge army to fight off the Valyrians, to drive them back from the Rhoynish lands. Unfortunately, it didn't go so well. You know, dragons tend to set fire to armies and not leave so much behind, and, you know, they were soundly defeated. And this is what led the princess of one of the remaining cities, Nymeria of Nysar, to lead what remained of her people, which was primarily women, children, older men, those who hadn't gone off in the fighting, those who hadn't then been enslaved or killed. She took them away from the Rhoyne and traveled to find a new home.
And one of the things we learned in the World of Ice and Fire is it wasn't just a straightforward, well, they just packed up and went to Dorne. It was a long, many years process of trying to find a homeland, basically. And obviously, in some respects, you can read, you know, you can read Exodus, Jews fleeing Egypt to find their homeland. And this has been reflected in fiction before. Most recently, Battlestar Galactica essentially has a kind of Exodus kind of where they're being pursued. And
the search of somewhere to stay, basically, has definitely made for TV shows and other stories before.
Now, on the positive side, Nymeria sounds like she would make a very strong central character. I'm using strong as one that is that you want to pay attention to, not necessarily, but
not a female fighter as such. I think George specifically noted that she was not a she was not a warrior queen. No. She, you know, whoever. Well, yes, but okay, but the idea of the actual idea is she's not Xena, the warrior princess.
She's closer to a Dany type figure of a woman who leads. And makes a command, has the strategy and the commands, but it's others who do the fighting. And obviously, once they get to Dorne, and it's a process of many years, you've got obviously a lot of scope for intrigues and battles, and Mors Martell could be an interesting figure, and so on and so forth. And obviously, then there's room for creating the cast of characters around her, her advisors, her supporters, people who don't agree with what she's doing, people in the various areas who try to subjugate them or attack them or drive them off. The cons to this as well, when I finished watching the show, Dorne, and from what everyone said, what I've been told, Dorne is a hot mess.
That is putting it mildly.
Yeah, I don't think that it unfortunately, I think they've driven a nail into the idea of Dorne as an area that people would want to visit in general. Yes, I know, but there's a few people cosplay and sand snakes and so on. It's not enough. It could have been a lot better, and it's not good enough. I don't think HBO is going to invest.
No, I would personally really like to see this one, because you'd get the part in Essos would be fascinating. There's a lot of fascinating stops on that journey to Dorne, and the political situation is far from straightforward when she's establishing herself there. I believe she goes through quite a few husbands as well, eventually. There's all sorts of intrigues for what happens when the Martells are finally established as the dominant house in Dorne. But yeah, I really don't see us getting anything more in Dorne.
No, and the sort of the Exodus part of it, the finding the homeland. I mean, again, it would be in the danger of becoming a sort of adventurous show where every few episodes are in a new place and trying to establish there, and then something goes wrong and they have to leave. Yeah.
You'd also have a very limited cast of characters compared to.
I mean, you obviously you would create characters, but they would all be this. Mostly with one tribe, the Rhoynar and Nymeria and her supporters, and obviously they can come up with the idea of conflict of people who don't agree with her, but it's very thin. It's very thin, I think, and it's hard to see where it captures entirely until you get to Dorne. Now maybe you could pitch the idea of the first season is them instead of Dany's multi-year journey to Westeros, they do a 1-year journey. To Dorne, and then after that it's
Nymeria's multi-year.
Well, Nymeria's multi-year journey done in one season, basically. Okay. And that's the setup, and then it's Dorne and the taking control of it and so on. But
unless you want to start basically by them doing the conflict between the Valyrians and the Rhoynar.
Well, then
you're talking some serious budgetary needs.
Yeah, the Field of Fire has nothing on.
Was it 1 million or half a million?
Half a million.
Rhoynish.
And destroyed in a battle with
hundreds of dragons.
100 odd dragons,
Yeah.
It's huge. I don't know. There's some things that are intriguing and interesting, but I don't find it hard. I mean, we have two aspects of if one of these 4 or 5 projects is based on the other lands, you have 1, would a writer hit on this? 2, would HBO say, let's develop that and see what we can make of it?
Yeah.
Is this one?
I could see a writer hitting on it because it has a female character as the lead.
Yeah.
It's essentially, one of the Star Treks with a female captain.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I think that as soon as somebody says Dorne in the meeting room, then
it's going to be a tough one.
And
no, it's a shame. But let's cover another one. The way I originally wrote this was Origins of the Faceless Men. Someone could be interested in the Faceless Men, their establishment, their history, their death cult. I realize, though, it's actually a bigger idea than that, or perhaps a more diverse idea if you don't focus just on the Faceless Men, but it's the origins of Braavos, escaped slaves, basically rebel slaves who rebel against the Valyrians, establishing the secret city in this lagoon, very much inspired by Venice.
Again, you have the potential of having a journey to start with, but maybe you want to...
But to establish there's a couple different points you could do it. One, you could do literally that. You could have the initial rebellion. I mean, hey, the slave uprising in Amistad was really well done. I'm sure you could do a larger scale one and then have them show up. But to me, more interesting is more once Braavos is established, but maybe the decision to come out of hiding. One of the things is, for many centuries, Braavos was the secret city. It was hidden, and they managed to hide their existence from the world. They sent out ships, they sent out sailors, but they dissimulated, and they just blended in with the other 3 cities and didn't draw any attention. So at this stage, what you have is you can have an established Faceless Men, you can have an established Iron Bank preparing to kind of go out and send the tendrils of its network. So you could have bankers, you could have assassins, you could have priests, you could have the Sea Lord and his first sword, and Braavos is the kind of milieu that can inspire a lot of different stories, a lot of different characters. They focused on it enough that I think
People will recognize
it would be recognized.
The thing that I see as being most difficult with Braavos is a story arc. And then there isn't a natural story arc to it other than the founding and the unmasking of Braavos. Yes, but with something like Nymeria, you have the story arc getting to Dorne, the Immortelles taking power in Dorne and sort of uniting all these petty kings under them.
Yeah.
With Braavos, it's more of it's the place that is the focus of it. There's no one character, there's no one storyline.
Well, obviously, this is we have nothing in our head. Obviously, someone would have to.
Yes, I mean, there isn't anything pre-made that says this is the story.
The unmasking it sounds like what were the circumstances, and after the unmasking, like one of the things that the Braavos and the Iron Bank does is they basically pay back the Valyrians for the value of the slaves who originally rebelled and revolted and found and the ships they took, and basically pays Valyria back, which is a really weird idea that they have, but and I only have also idea about the Sea Lords. There's a little bit of intrigues and poisonings and things. Courtesans.
So I mean, there's all these elements for making.
If it would feel a little bit like Borgia or one of those other shows.
Exactly. You have a city that is very much the central character, and it's how people are living in the city, like the character of the city.
No, this is not unknown to HBO. I mean, Deadwood. I mean, the characters are huge and important to it, and we're not saying, but Deadwood as a place and the frontier is something that works. Or if you look at The Wire, Baltimore, and it's sort of the seedy side, the police, and the social. The story of is a story of a fantasy society's development, sort of a multi-perspective, seeing it from different levels of that society. Is that going to necessarily grab people? Well, I think HBO would be willing to take a chance on developing a pitch. So I can kind of see Braavos. And I mean, it's funny. I mean, really even talk about it. George years ago revealed that one of the vague ideas he had of as a potential novel was to write a story set in Braavos that was essentially like a murder mystery.
You could certainly play around with different types of stories. Yes, it's a fantasy setting, but you could do
actors too. I mean, actors are
absolutely true. So I think that one does have potential. I tend to prefer the ones that have the stronger arc, but I can see that the city itself, and if somebody pitches this and works on it who has good knowledge of fantasy cities, there's a lot of tropes and things that they could borrow and play around with. You could be looking at your Lankmar novels, for example, or the Thieves City anthology series.
Thieves World, right?
Thieves World, yes.
Yeah. And, lots of interesting possibilities as far as that goes. So and with Braavos, again, you'd have essentially like a single location, so that's something that might be appealing. You'd have obviously sets, and then you'd film out I think they did some of the filming out in Croatia. I'm sure they could find something.
You need a lot of canals.
It'd be lovely to film in Venice, but I think that's cost prohibitive.
Yes.
Let's move on. We're going to kind of stick to the Free Cities with this next one.
The next idea merges some of the free cities together, basically, by looking at the century of blood that followed the destruction of Valyria and the conflicts that arose in that power vacuum. This would certainly be a very bloody, very political, but perhaps also rather expensive idea, because there's a lot of battles going on.
Yeah, that is the one issue, obviously, but at the same time, like, it captures that kind of chaos. Instead of a continent thrown into chaos after the Doom, it has a scope for. I mean, what happens here? Volantis becomes a preeminent free city, tries to essentially take on the mantle, the freehold, and brings the others to heel. Braavos and some of the others eventually fight back. The Dothraki break out of the Dothraki Sea and start causing havoc. The Targaryens, not entirely, but mostly the only surviving Dragon Lords, are established on Dragonstone. And how do they interact? I mean, they left Dragonstone left Valyria before the Doom. They had the premonition from Dana the Dreamer that they had to prophecies that something was going to happen, and they seemed to have left because of it.
So you could have a cameo from Balerion.
You could have Balerion, the Black Dread. He existed back then. An Aenar Targaryen, or you could also have, if you go towards the end of the Century of Blood, you're going to get stuff like this Grand Alliance against Volantis, in which the Storm King, Argilac, led troops fighting. And you had Aegon himself coming over in Balerion, burning some things and taking part in this alliance against Volantis. So it is
quite a grand scope. It's
a grand scope, but it's also a very dynamic period. You have sellsword companies, you've got lords and merchants, and you have a story in the World Ice and Fire of a dragon lord who one of the last who survived in Qohor, declaring himself emperor and collecting men to go and take charge of Valyria and never being seen from again. You have all sorts of interesting things you could do.
A lot of politics in Volantis itself. Yeah. If you'd perhaps want to use Volantis as the base.
They featured it a bit. People have heard it. They featured a little bit, that long bridge and so on. You got the priests. You could probably have things tie in a bit into, priests talking about the darkness. Is this the darkness that has come upon the world, the doom of Valyria? Yeah. Are we supposed to be looking for Azor Ahai? Maybe you have false prophets and false Azor Ahais, and so you could have all sort of things that connect together. It could be very big and expensive, but you could always narrow it down to some particular segment or some particular microcosm, some aspect of it. Maybe. Whether the Free Cities have made enough impression on HBO and on readers, I don't know. Braavos definitely has.
Braavos has. If Volantis has, it's hard to say. I think that there's probably a fair amount of interest in R'hllor, or the Lord of Light, as they insist on calling him all the time on the show. So I guess that would continue to be the case in a successor show, probably. But they have established the priesthood. They have done a fair bit with the Red Priests and so on. So Volantis may have some draw in that sense.
Yeah.
But it might be just too big and too sprawling. There's just
you have to work very hard to get a good narrative. I mean, obviously, big and sprawling. Ice and Fire is big and sprawling, and they've obviously had a lot of problems. But I think one of the beauties of something Century of Blood that's so open is you can really narrow down the pitch. For example, I could see someone say, I want to show the rise and fall of a sellsword company over several years. Some brilliant commanders, rivals, they get involved in some of these fights, and it leads, and so you have a through line, and you can visit various parts, and you can see various aspects of the story where the commander starts trying to make himself a noble, and he gets betrayed. I mean, you have all kinds of things.
Although a sellsword company is...
Sorry to sound a little bit like Berserk, but anyways.
But it also starts sounding like a very male idea, I think. I mean,
yes, some women
there
fighters,
are some, but it is more. It's even more of a guy thing.
It is a fair point. That was just a pitch, but yes, absolutely. One of the things is that has made Game of Thrones popular is that it has a lot of female characters, and that have become popular, at least among typical viewers. That people follow and are interested in. Stop hitting the table.
Oops!
It shakes. A pitch like that, you could maybe make it work.
They would be a little samey, as in if you're having female mercenaries, it would be difficult to. You don't have a lot of range to the type of character you can have. They're all going to be tough fighters to be a sellsword company. I
suppose. I mean,
yes, okay, there could be them hanger-on courtesans or
prostitutes,
camp followers or whatever. But
a priestess who kind of goes along the string to the you could.
But it's more limiting. It is more limiting.
It is. So, anyways, it was just a random idea. Just kind of, or you could just focus on one of the cities in the conflict.
Yes.
Show a merchant family who lost their ships in the fighting and what happens to them, and you could do a lot of things, but it's. Whether it sticks out to people, I don't know. Whether HBO would go for it. I mean, somewhere, if we are to take George at his word, at least one of these pitches is outside of Westeros. So
somewhere they've found things that are interesting enough, yes?
Got one more really set one, which I'm not so certain about, but we'll discuss that one. One of the ideas I was thinking about is always, and I think I've seen others mention it, is Corlys Velaryon. Corlys the Sea Snake. Now, he's a character never mentioned on the show, maybe with DVD extras or Blu-ray extras have mentioned him. And this is, the Sea Snake. He was a famous lord and explorer, adventurer who had many famous journeys sailing far and wide. He sailed as far as Ashai. He sailed far north, to where, there are glaciers the size of mountains floating in the sea. He sailed all over. And in the process of doing so, he became immensely wealthy. His lands became, he created a whole city, essentially, that became a major trading point. So much so that King's Landing sort of suffered, became a bit poorer because of it. And he married a Targaryen who could have become queen, the queen who never was. And, his children would all be important. And so you have this really fascinating figure. The downside is, well, you kind of want to show some of these journeys, and then you get the adventure issue, which I don't know that HBO would go for. And it would be, because you could show him later in life after most of the adventure is done, and it's the
then
politics.
You're pretty much doing the Dance of the Dragons.
Yeah, but then you're starting to hit Dance of the Dragons, and you're no longer beyond Westeros. So we have to focus on his early part of his career for this idea. And someone else might try it. Black Sail became really popular for some people. Well, but popular, but
it's not really an adventure show in that sense. I mean, they have a base, right? That they were sort of going out pirating a bit, but it's not a travel around the world explorer show.
No, and
I mean, Star Trek manages to be very popular.
Star Trek manages, but on the other hand, Star Trek can kind of just say, and this episode, it's episodic. This episode was somewhere else. I mean, okay, the later series became more serialized, but I don't know. Like,
it's true that ship can just flip all over just like that. And
HBO has done episodic shows. They've got episodic anthology shows. They've got episodic comedy shows, but they haven't really done episodic drama that I can think of. Off the top of my head. And I think they would find it weird. And there's no strong, really, through line. Now, you could do a sort of almost like Wolf Hall kind of inspired push, which is covered a very broad span of time, following a character from youth. So then you got The Lands Beyond, and you got glimpses of these things, and you see his character develop, and then his marriage, onto the ill-fated marriage of his son Laenor to Rhaenyra, and maybe, I guess, but
then you're basically doing the Dance of the Dragons as a side thing to Corlys Velaryon, sort of.
Or as a lead-in, as in Corlys as a lead-in to a dance.
Yeah, I suppose you could use it as that approach.
And Velaryon's not a name people know. Velaryon's never mentioned on the shows, other than, again, maybe in the extras, but I don't think it has been, so... I don't know. That one feels... Well,
it's more now if somebody got really enamored with showing all sorts of weird and wonderful places.
Yeah, I mean, Ashai is fascinating. The Thousand Islands is creepy.
The Jack Vance version of of the show, basically, showing all those strange places that George has created. But it would need a lot of different locales to really capture that.
No, I don't know. The more I talk about it, the less likely it seems as a possibility.
I agree.
Let's wrap up this. I see some other ideas more briefly, kind of, that crop up, and then we'll leave it for the next episode. We'll go more firmly in sort of Westerosi history.
The last thing might be to discuss a bit more briefly, because we don't really think any of these ideas has very strong merits, but would HBO look at doing a show set, other than being set in a free city like Braavos or Volantis, would they look at a show set predominantly in another area of Essos? A Dothraki show, for example.
The Dothraki coming out of the Dothraki Sea, destroying Sarnor and so on. Maybe Drogo, like the thing is,
it's
like,
very Vikings then.
It's very Vikings.
Yeah.
And Vikings has been popular, so maybe that would. But it feels like we're just following some barbarians like Vikings. Well, we're HBO. We don't do stuff like somebody else. We do something original. But you could do so, and also Marco Polo, I guess, has a little bit of that as well. So that was a failure for her. So I'm dubious. I mean, yeah, Drogo's really popular, but the Dothraki, I don't think as such aren't particularly. It was Drogo, and that was Jason Momoa's charisma and so on really sold his character. But I don't think, and I think, as I said on the show, the Dothraki are very much background prop to this point. They don't have speaking lines. They don't have
they seem to have basically they're just Danny's pets.
So I find it unlikely. Going in a completely different direction. I mean, pre-Doom, Valyria, or maybe in the years leading up to the Doom, you could follow the Targaryens when they're essentially
a minor
dragon lords among the various noble families, and their decision to kind of flee to Dragonstone and being mocked for it as weaklings, and you get the politics of the place. You could leave the politics that lead to the Doom, perhaps, or at least one account is that there's.
Yeah. I mean, that's another one that I would love, because you have a lot of aspects. You could start with, for example, you have the side of the slaves.
But money.
Yes.
Money. Valyria, you can't just... Okay.
I mean, they did Valyria very differently on the show. But if they, in a successor show, would want to do something closer to... I mean, they could say that it completely changed after their Doom, for example.
Yeah.
You are talking about a city with streets... lava-filled streets.
I mean, I'm sure they're dropping that sort of thing.
Tall towers that, dragons flew between. You basically...
Lots of dragons. And it's very fantastical.
Everyone in silver gold wigs. There's that part as well, if you want to be accurate.
Yeah, no, I think... things like... Shows like Rome would obviously be antecedents to this, and then
I love
kind of see it. You kind of see how it could work, but budget wise, I just can't. I can't imagine a Valyria show would be something that HBO.
I mean, somebody could just admittedly go and do an Elric show. It's obviously a strong inspiration on Valyria and on the Dragon Lords. I mean, but that property has been around for ages, and nobody has felt that is we even doable.
Have, one of the names of Azor Ahai is Elric, Shadow Chaser. So.
But no, as much as I would, it's one I would like to see. I think because I think it has a really interesting possibility, especially sort of following Targaryens really early on, and then perhaps following some of the slaves leading to the first faceless man.
Okay, so I was thinking some of the other areas, and like E.T., like it's never. I mean, Nemiria's mother on the show is supposed to be from there. No one knows. Cares. Yes, I think the mother is supposed to be from E.T. They explaining what Jessica Henwick is of really? Asian origin. But warrior
maidens from
Kai and I no. I don't think so. The Samarials. So one of the big gripes has been the lack of diversity of the show, and they cut out so many of the Summer Islanders: Jalal Varzo, Shartaya, Alayaya, the crew of the Cinnamon Wind, and the World West Empire actually has a lot of stuff about. Now the problem, of course, I was just well, the big issue is that the Summer Isles history includes the fact that they were fairly isolated and peaceful people, and then they were found and they became a source of slaves, and then. This warrior queen or princess.
I think HBO is already doing one of those.
And I'd be like, this is really just stepping on Confederates' toes. The Confederate got a lot of crap thrown at it. Some of it rightly. HBO really messed up when they were announcing this.
Also, I don't know that I trust HBO to do a show about sacred prostitution. I could see all sorts of problems with that. I don't personally have a problem with this being an aspect of the Summer Isles in sort of the world of Ice and Fire and such.
So the handling of it by anyone.
Yes. Once you go deeper into it, when it's lightly sketched, yes, people could start talking about, it's stereotypical, whatever, but you don't really know more about it. You have basically people reporting on it for the most part. You have very you don't have that much information. And then when you start digging into it, that's where the handling of it is going to be complicated. So I really don't see that as a very likely prospect at all.
No, you're right. You're right.
And
especially,
I mean, to be honest, it's not that interesting. They have some politics of their own, but if they get too conflicty, they exile people.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think internally, but the survivors are, I mean, they are
relatively peaceful and utopian.
They have
doesn't sound like an HBO show.
The battles are extremely sort of ritualized, with minimal loss of life, and when you lose, you go into exile, and that's it. I mean, that's one of the things. Jalabhar Zoe is not a nice guy because he's trying to break the rules. He lost, he got exiled. He's decided trying to bring an army of foreign barbarians to reclaim his rights, and like, why? You're not that
he's
special.
Not playing by the rules of his society. No. But a utopian society doesn't sound like an HBO show to me, even if there's lots of sex.
Yeah. So I think that covers Sephorios is another one some people mentioned to us. I don't... Same kind of things. And also, I mean, if you want to have someone exploring it, I mean, you have a lot of issues with sort of the tropes of deepest, darkest anywhere. And also the adventure aspect, and I don't see it. I don't see anyone being particularly keen on it. I think
any show that is just sort of going and visiting places and not really having a strong connection to those places.
They do serial drama. You have to have something serialized, I think, and something that has a larger arc than just we're going from point A to point B. It has to be there's something going on. So with that, we will close, and we will next episode. Don't know when we're recording it. Probably not tomorrow. Maybe Tuesday. We'll discuss quite a few ideas for in Westeros stories.
There's certainly more of those.
There's a lot more.
There are more obvious stories, I think, because when you're looking outside, you have more descriptions of places than story arcs and continuing serialized stories.
Like 7 different ideas written down. So
if HBO runs out of them, they can just ask you.
Yeah.